There was this guy, it's insane, but it wasn't his fault. But he started a Pazuzu cult on the East Coast, and he
Did you say Pazuzu?
Pazuzu, the demon Pazuzu.
Okay, that's the first. That's the first clue.
That's the first clue, and he was doing all this stuff, and he got arrested and charged for it and sentenced to life in prison. But he had claimed to have a deal or a pact with this demon, and he had to sacrifice something to it during different rotations. So he's in prison, and he goes crazy one day, telling the guards to bring him an animal or something that he could kill, anything, because he has to sacrifice it to Pazuzu, or Pazuzu's gonna get him. So he doesn't do it. Obviously, they're like, yeah, okay, guy, whatever. And so, of course, he couldn't get anything. He was locked up. On the next morning, they found his body with a gash right across his neck.
Welcome back. I'm here again with Benton Ryer. Benton, welcome back.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back. Hello, everyone.
Okay, so in the last episode, we talked about Shinto. We talked about the nature of healing, the nature of kind of the unseen world around us. We're going to continue to talk about that, kind of the nature of the unseen world, particularly with respect to shamanism. How would you define shamanism, just to get us started?
Shamanism, in its most simple terms, is working with spirits to heal people.
Okay, and is there an element or with nature involved with that, or?
There is, because there's a lot of unseen forces within nature that are always interacting with us and us always with them, except the vision, it goes one-sided. They could see us, but most people can't see them. However, many of them or most of them don't actually know that. So it causes a lot of discord.
Oh, so on the entities that can see us don't know that we can't see them.
Most of them, a lot of nature spirits don't know that we can't see them. A lot of earthly kami, especially the lesser ones, I can't say that the lesser, but they have no idea that we can't see them. So they just think we're ignorant and we do all these things and type of just trash the environment for no reason or to disrespect them. I guess a good example of that is the telescope in Hawaii. The locals protested, saying this area is sacred. And coincidentally, the volcano has been erupting since they've been building it. And despite what they say, the government is just building away. Although when they stop, the volcano will stop.
Interesting. So can you describe some of these nature spirits that are around us? Like, how dense are they in the sense that, like...
They're very dense. They come in all types. The stuff of fantasies, there's a lot of that. Stuff that has been perceived in the past but has been reduced to legend or folklore.
Like fairies and...
Yeah, a lot of that stuff
Celtic.
Is real. Yeah, absolutely. It's real. And I don't know what else to say about it other than it's just something that has been disregarded over time as fantasy.
Is there a way to communicate with these entities?
Yes, there are. Being in touch with nature, and as you develop your own shamanistic skills or mediumistic, you're able to perceive these things better over time. And that's basically the only way. You could leave offerings and things like that to them to appease and even almost gain a reciprocal relationship with them. But like as far as walking around and talking to them, it's just not accessible to everyone. In places like Thailand, you'll see, these little houses with little offerings, and you'll see them all over the place. It's the same idea. They are leaving offerings for nature spirits and also human spirits too that are wandering the land.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
Okay, I think we talked about this before we started recording, but I'll bring it up again. So my audience, most of them, if people are just joining, you'll hear it first here, but the rest of the audience have heard this a million times. So back in September of 2023, I had a great horned owl that was literally just sitting on my fence. And I kind of just mentally projected, like, please stay there so I can take a photo. Like, I can't believe this is happening, etc. So I got out a very sophisticated camera and was able to walk to within 5 feet of the owl. Took 1,000 photos, took a bunch of video, and it just didn't. It seemed like a bit of a mystical experience, but it was an owl. It wasn't, it wasn't some screen memory because I have proof, right? But it felt mystical in some sense, like it was a signpost on a path. But I really didn't know what to make out of it. And before then, for months, I had been hearing owls in my backyard, seeing them, kind of glimpses of them, just their wings, things like that. And then after that, I started seeing them a lot more. And, I know many people who have never seen an owl in their entire lives. And I've seen more in the last 2 years than I've seen again in my entire life.
So people in my group have often communicated with me about owls and having the same experience that you've been having. Traditionally, owls in many cultures worldwide have been seen as a sort of divine being. And as far as I knew, the indigenous people of Hokkaido in Japan, they see owls as actual vessels for kamui, which are very similar to kami, but they house themselves in these animals. And one of their preferences to house themselves in is an owl. So there is a sense of divinity within that animal, which functions almost like an observer, or like you said, a signpost that you are on the right path, or you have a sort of protection to stay on that path. I don't recommend relying on ideas that I'm protected, because there's so many bigger fish in the unseen world that there could become a point where it's like you have no protection at all. And that happens to people. People hear about good spiritual stories, but there's also stories that no one hears about, in which the reason being for that is that the person who was involved in it isn't around to tell it anymore. And I'll give you a good document.
Yeah, I was going to say, give me some examples of that.
Yeah, a good documented example of that. There was this guy, it's insane, but, it wasn't his fault. But he started a Pazuzu cult on the East Coast, and he did all this.
Did you say Pazuzu?
Pazuzu, the demon Pazuzu.
Okay, that's the first. That's the first clue.
That's the first clue. And he was doing all this stuff, and he got arrested and charged, and sentenced to life in prison. But he claimed to have a deal or a pact with this demon, and he had to sacrifice something to it. during different rotations. So he's in prison and he goes crazy one day, telling the guards to bring him an animal or something that he could kill, anything, because he has to sacrifice it to Pazuzu, or Pazuzu is going to get him. So he doesn't do it. Obviously, they're like, yeah, okay, guy, whatever. And so, of course, he couldn't get anything. He was locked up. On the next morning, they found his body with a gash right across his neck. For example. So if one of these things wants to do something to someone, there's not really much stopping them.
Another word on that particular entity. It is an entity in Sumerian and Babylonian mythology. So there's a group of researchers, Barry Fitzgerald and Stephen Mira. They have loose ties, but they have ties to intelligence circles. And they do a lot of research on the phenomenon. And when they started delving into Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian practices, really, really frightening things started happening to both of them.
These are the only practices that seem to actually be what, the popular kind of idea is. Because I've encountered many, many entities. The Judeo-Christian ideas of evil entities, it's just not so much there. But when you get to the Siberian stuff, it gets really, really dark. I have an example. Oh, it's a nightmare. So very early when I started, I had a Facebook group that was like a magic group where I'm trying to get people. I've tried so many ways to get people in to work on purification and stuff. And I had this lady who had like rage. It would just consume her. It would just consume her at different points. She'll be like really cool 1 second. Then, especially when we got into relationships, she would go mad. But she worked as like a night nurse. And when someone was passing away, she would be by the person and absorb the energy of them passing away. Not only that, when she got into it with someone, the person would, how could I say it? They would end up on their deathbed. So her ex-husband, ex-boyfriend, other people, they were all dying. And a bunch of them passed. So I looked into it, and sure enough, it was this, I don't even really want to repeat the name, this Babylonian spirit of death or death demon.
It wasn't Lamashtu, was it?
As a matter of fact, it was. It was a female demon. Yeah, that was the one. So all these people were passing away around her, and it was probably making the people in the hospital take a turn too. But I got rid of it. I pulled it out of her. And right away, I was like, okay, I need to build all my defenses. I need to call on this and this and this and have myself surrounded. But this particular entity doesn't like fighting. It sees itself as above it. So it didn't lash out. It was furious. But since it doesn't do that, it doesn't lash out. So these things are very individual. They have their own thinking. They're all different. They are independent intelligences. They're not attached to, and they do not serve anything. So yeah, that was an interesting one. That was one of my cases that I've worked on.
How did she get associated with that entity?
It just came. She had no idea. It just happened to her. Like her energetic disposition came to that. She eventually did lose it on her boyfriend and pulled a knife on him. I don't know what happened after that. She didn't do the stuff I gave her to do to keep it away. So it just came back. There's certain beings I can destroy, but when it comes to something ancient as that, you can't destroy it. You can only pull it out of someone and put up blocks and a few other things and help them purify. If the person is completely purified, which is very, very hard at the moment, I'm getting better. The idea is to be able to do it once and have it ongoing. But to be able to do that, apparently, if that actually is the next step, and I've already crossed the line across unbelievability, so I believe that it's possible. So clear someone completely, to be able to do that, I have more work to do myself. So I don't want to claim that I'm the purest person on earth. I'm not. It's an ongoing process. But just me, myself, being able to do what I'm doing and being able to, show people and have them interact with it and get benefit from it just shows how deep it goes and how much there is to remove. So, being able to do it so it keeps moving, throughout the person's life until they're clear completely, which I have no idea what that looks like yet, is, my goal. Whether it's unattainable or not, I hope so. But I'm not waiting on it either. I'm doing the best I can. And I'm, going to do the best I can to educate people on the impact this has, so that maybe people could, take what I'm offering and be able to draw their own ways or figure other ways out to pull these things out. Because no one's.
By the way, how is it that I guessed the name of a very specific Sumerian entity like that?
Probably because she's watching.
Freaking me out. But no, that's good. I just had a sense because, it helped that it was a female.
Yeah,
right?
There's not very many. And there's other female Sumerian that aren't malevolent like that. They're all different.
In fact, I think in the Sumerian practice, they would invoke, I'm not going to say these names anymore for obvious reasons. They would invoke the first one that you mentioned to protect against the second one, apparently.
Yeah. So it's important to realize and understand that, I don't know, I can't say that for these.
You can't say that.
They have a aspect of nobility to them. They're part of the natural order. They're not like the ETs who are just trying to enslave people. They are part of the natural order and part of this world and have been for a long time, and they do have their purpose. It's hard to make the argument from what I know for them to be evil for the sake of being evil, but they are noble, which has its own problems, as many of us know, especially throughout history, as far as the nobility and royalty.
Yeah, the elite.
Yeah.
Right.
So, right. And I think that's why you could see that in, some of our leaders and within human nature. They will have a capacity for compassion and having people around them. Hitler had a dog. He had family members he cared for, but they could still do very dictatorial things that defy all logic and sense. And it's not their fault, man.
What is it about these Sumerian entities in particular that are more problematic? Or you're like, oh, I got one of these. I gotta.
They're very strong.
Because that's not the first time I heard it. I just told you,
they have a lot of influence in this world. Their nature is the foundation of a lot of chaos, and that's spread from there. However, they would back away if human beings had the proper alignment for purity and being clean. So impurities, they act as anchor points for these things. In the same way that through purification, I'm able to work through the heavenly kami And I could call on other stuff too. I could call on Orphic deities, and I could call on Nokian angels, things like that. And
what are Orphic deities?
They're like the Olympic deities, and Egyptian.
The what?
Olympic deities and Egyptian. And their function, they remove different things from the people I'm working on, and they operate differently. People who come to the groups, and I don't do those ones that much, especially the angels, they pull too much out and they scare too many people while they're doing it because they don't have
specific angels, like the ones that would be
doing the Enochian calls. Enochian calls, the John Dee ones.
Yeah, I'm familiar with John Dee, but I'm not familiar with the Enochian.
Well, there's 48 keys, and when I recite those, it does the same type of purification. It's not the same. It's a lot different. And they don't have the same mind as heavenly kami or Olympic deities when they're doing removals, because they'll just take whatever's right there, and it really scares people because they just see it as an impurity and aren't really looking at the person's, what it will do. Removing something or too much will do to the person's mental state. Does that make sense? That's just the nature of angels being cosmic balance. Whereas,
they're binary. Binary. I'm just going to remove, if I have to throw out the baby with the bathwater, I will.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Whereas, Olympic deities will kind of look at someone and they'll pass over people if something's too deep, or the person's not ready to have something removed, or it will cause more damage than is worth for the person at that moment. And the kami are a little different in that it's very subtle. It's powerful, but it's very subtle, and they only pull off one layer at a time. Like I said, the hardest thing to deal with is people with trauma and getting them to come back, because they've built this structure, and when it comes crumbling down, they get depressed, although they were never meant to operate through that lens of trauma. They can't contextualize. I talked about that in your last episode a little bit more, so we'll skip over that. But now it's considered an impurity.
The two really dark examples that you just provided me with, were those people that had approached you to help get cleared, or was that in a book? Was it?
So those came when I really started doing this, and I was starting to, I was learning things. One of them was just my group, one of my Facebook groups, and I worked on her. We talked, and I was offering people these for free because I was practicing. And by the way, the groups every night, they're free. I don't charge people for them. They donate if they want. If they want a one-on-one, I only charge like $60 or $70. I try to be as accessible to everyone as I can. If someone can't pay, I don't charge them, especially if they're incapacitated in some way and they have absolutely no money. I just can't do it. And especially because there's folks out there who can do nothing and are charging people $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $2,000. I'm not going to name any names, but there's one guy who can move a little bit of energy. And that's another thing. Since people don't have a reference point, if they could feel a little energy move inside their body, they think, oh, this person is so powerful. And those are the folks who really try to rip people off. Now,
is that something you can assess from a distance if someone has capability or potential?
Yeah, I could do it. Yeah, everyone does. Just people are at a different place. There's so many variables in that, and it's hard to tell. Yeah, that it doesn't happen for most people. There has to be some work involved. Some people are just born with it because that part of their blockages aren't in the way, or other people, such as myself, by the way, have to kind of build up to being able to do something. And I think that in itself is, I don't like the idea of people having gifts, but it's a gift too, because since I wasn't born that way exactly, I mean, I was, but I wasn't. I had to learn and I had to figure stuff out and I had to try different things. Where I know people who were just about born with whatever they can, and they tend to lump it into the belief system that they grew up with. And it's just their mechanics are all wrong. The mechanics that they think that it's coming from, it's just not where it is. And it's really unfortunate because the mechanics are very important. Because especially when you start teaching other people or trying to, it just doesn't work.
Now, have you encountered any of these dark entities in your own life where they would just kind of show up, try to attach themselves?
Oh, all the time. All the time.
Like particularly powerful ones?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I say the person I've been working with recently, the Native American guy, I mentioned him in the last episode. He was describing how he just very often escapes. He's protected, but he'll escape death at the last minute. I've had those circumstances too, especially in the New Age area or the type of atmosphere. People describe these sort of entities as tricksters, which is ridiculous in itself because they're so dangerous and they're diminishing how dangerous these things are by calling them something so trivial. This tells me that many of these folks can perceive these things, but are being tricked by these things into making them think that either they don't exist or that they're not very powerful. But like I said, if they want to do something to somebody, there's nothing stopping them, especially if the person doesn't know anything about magical or shamanic defenses. They're just a sitting target. So
if someone is on the path, A, how do they know? And then B, what steps should they take to continue?
So if someone's on the path, they should automatically assume that there is something blocking certain aspects of what they can do. And they really need to start looking and scanning inward and doing real purification practices. I would love to say that you could go to this place and this place and this place, but I know of two people that are able to do something three rather, doing something very similar to what I'm going to do. One person has exact same mechanics as I'm doing. I found him on YouTube too. Somebody told me about him. Is this dangerous? And one person, he had a TLC show. He was on TLC, The Healer. His name's Charlie. He could do a type of purification, but it's a different current. And one person found me is on a different current. She's more on a Hellenistic current, but it still does the type of purification. But the issue is, since I taught her, obviously, she knows a lot that the other two don't. But that's because her current has a certain amount of mystical ability or mediumistic ability where she gets very clear messages. It's really quite amazing. We could be discussing a book and needing to read something out of it, and I'll go, what page? And she'll get the exact number. And when I read it, it's exactly what we needed or talking about. We got into an argument about picking stocks. She didn't want to do it, although she can. However, but the problem is she's inaccessible. She doesn't want to be seen. And the other two, they don't know that much. I mean, one of them, I hate for him to see this episode because I actually like him a lot.
Yeah, I wouldn't say names.
But they're going to know.
But no one else will. So you won't be shaming them.
Yeah. They'll know when they feel it if they come to my session and his. But he's stuck in this new age stuff that's, some of it's only 30, 40 years old. It's not ancient.
Is this like the raw
stuff.
Materials, law of one, that sort of stuff?
The raw materials, the source channeling source, guides. And when you're like around a bunch of people in a drum circle and them all saying the same thing, they're not going to listen to one person. So I hope I could teach him more. He's younger than me. And honestly, partially, I went through that phase myself where I would at least humor some of that stuff. But it has to be a very slow process. If I'm going to help him and get him to the realization that he could actually get stronger or his ability stronger, which is already very good, by the way.
How are people able to discern if it's a benevolent entity versus a malevolent entity?
That's a great question, and I have an answer for it. But the issue is people aren't clairaudient. But if they are, they could ask they could ask the entity to recite the Lotus Sutra. They could ask it to recite the Lotus Sutra, or they could ask it to recite the frequency of heaven, the Shinto frequency of heaven, he, the, me. And if it can't do it, it's malevolent.
Is there a way that somebody who is familiar with those two?
That's the problem people have to learn.
Yeah.
Like you can't hide. If there's a methodology to do something, you can't hide behind ignorance. It's like the ignorance of the law. And I don't like using that word. I feel like I've been saying that a lot. I don't like a lot. But you just have to learn. People aren't willing to. They don't want to venture outside of their own type of research or looking at things. It can make them feel uncomfortable if they're looking into something else. If something is your religion, just reading another text is blasphemy. And that goes with anything.
Yeah, which is ridiculous, right?
It's absolutely ridiculous.
Although I wouldn't read transcripts of exorcisms.
I advise against it. There is stuff attached to it. Listening to it's worse. I've gotten books where I've gotten dizzy reading, and I had to shut it down, the connection to it.
Well, I think there's a book of transcripts from a Catholic exorcist. It might be Father Amaranth or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember which, but there's a warning at the beginning, like make sure whatever the Catholic version of purification is, like say these prayers before you read this.
They shouldn't have released that to the public. See, priests are within an order, a structured order that can deal with exorcisms, whether it's really a divine type of source that helps them or a legion of angels or saints before them. They're within that structure to be able to do that. But the regular person, and I think they're sort of blind to that, they're not going to be able to do that because they're not within that order. So, for example, priests are, or they should be, and I hope exorcists are. Well, exorcists have to be, because if they're not, the entity that they're trying to exorcise could leverage that in its favor. But they're celibate. They have to have a certain amount of purity to be able to do those exorcisms. Because if there's any type of impurity, I'm just going to use the Shinto language because that's what I'm familiar with, that could open a hole or leave it that's a hole within like their spirit or soul, that entity could attach to them and do whatever it wants. But because they live a certain way, they're able to do that and able to escape a lot of damage. But that's not to say that they're completely protected from it. It always leaves a mark. Every exorcism. And unfortunately, there might be some aspects of it, but the self-purification within that tradition isn't that deep because it's not a part of Catholic tradition. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There's a tradition of celibacy, so innately there is that. And not only that, within Eastern traditions, it's an idea that you want to stay, you want to control your urges in a way because there's power in being able to control it that kind of perpetuates or enforces metaphysical power. So you want to lay off of urges. But no, it's a real
but that
thing.
doesn't necessarily have to be the celibate part. I mean, that's one aspect. But it could be, not overeating, right? That's
not
why
overeating,
fasting.
you're not getting drunk. I mean, like the priests who do that, they have to be clean. Because if they are not, they will take a slide for the worse. As we see priests do. But especially the ones in that field specifically, they have to be like on it.
In terms of kind of where all this fits, where does all this fit in the afterlife?
So let's just take reincarnation. So I'm under the impression that we're not actually supposed to forget things between each lifetimes. I'm under the impression that we're supposed to remember everything before we were born as we reincarnated, but as we go through the cycle, we're blocked by something. And because we're in the same way, we're blocked from abilities or extrasensory perception. And that stuff doesn't want us to be able to see it. And because we're blocked, we cannot accumulate lifetimes of knowledge. I mean, how powerful would people be if they could remember 1,000 years back? And when they say powerful, I mean knowledge. I mean, how much knowledge would that be? It would be a lot. I mean, 100-year-old person would be like a child compared to someone who's lived over and over and remembers everything. But that's how it's supposed to be. And it's also why I get that impression too when we see these young kids that actually remember their past lives, whether they're an expert on a piano at 4 years old, or they could play the drums, or they remember where they were buried, and they could describe every detail. There's a lot of cases like that. And those are accidents. They were supposed to forget everything between, but for some reason, there's that space in between where they didn't. And everyone's supposed to be that. And I think that once we're there, that's just going to change the fundamentally. And I hope we are. And I hope we get there. That's just going to change, human dynamics on such a incomprehensible scale that, well, like, who's your family then, right? Who are your parents? It changes everything, but it is also how things are supposed to be. And that's also why I think Shinto doesn't have answers for the afterlife. I think fundamentally, we're not even supposed to be worried about it.
Interesting. Do you think we're blocked?
Yeah, I think we're blocked.
By design? I think
we're blocked by design, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Any final words for the audience?
Dang, it was already? Shit, I don't know. Like I said, I do these purifications, try it out. You will get experience. Initially, it could be hard because of the trauma thing, but you'll just start becoming more and more clear. A few people have come to the groups. They've been able to develop some abilities too. Are excited about that. And I'm not giving them anything. I'm unblocking. And yeah, you just have to give it a try.
All right, my friend. It was an absolute pleasure, and talk soon, okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much again.
Yeah, it was all my pleasure.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book, rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of an expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's two options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site, and there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much, and keep watching. I really appreciate it.